Hello and welcome back to the Lead Pile. Now, this month marks the 40th anniversary of my local Wargames Club, Kirriemuir Wargames Club. And to celebrate this, we put on a weekend monster game featuring 4 tables of Operation Market Garden, and we used 28mm models and the rapid fire rules. In this video, I've accumulated quite a lot of photographs and video clips of our game, and I've compiled them here for your pleasure. So without further ado, let's go back to World War II. It's Operation Market Garden. Okay, so here we go. Welcome to the Netherlands, and it's Operation Market Garden. What we have here is 4 tables, 5 if you include the one that's joined on to table 4. And this represents different areas of the Netherlands that feature in Operation Market Garden. So on table 1, we have the Eindhoven area, and this is with the US 101st Airborne. These guys were dropped in and had to secure multiple bridges, such as at Son and Best over the Wilhelmina Canal. On table 2, we had the Nijmegen area, and this was the US 82nd Airborne's landing zone. This was a particularly busy table with bridges at Veghel over the Zuid-Willemstar Canal, followed by Grave Bridge over the Maas River. This table would see some of the fiercest fighting, second maybe only to Arnhem itself. Then on the 3rd table, and this is the table where I was playing for the weekend, we had what we were using we were using British Airborne for the models, but these guys were representing Polish Airborne. And the Polish Airborne Brigade would land here across 3 multiple villages, and their objective was to secure these villages and establish bulkheads at Nijmegen Bridge and Arnhem Bridge. And that's because 30 Corps, the Americans, are on their way, and the objective for the Allies was to allow these bridges to be captured so that this would allow 30 Corps to trundle along and reinforce Arnhem itself. Well, that was the plan, but would it prove to be a bridge too far? Well, day one started off with fierce fighting pretty much from the get-go. And this is because the Germans were well prepared and pretty well defended as well. So we rolled to see where our airborne squads would land, and this was done right at the start of day one. This didn't go very well for the Poles, however, who on table 3 found themselves in pretty open, boggy terrain. This meant that for pretty much most of day one, me, as the commanding officer of the Polish Airborne Brigade, were, well, suffering pretty heavy losses, not helped, of course, by my terrible dice rolling. In Arnhem, in the open heathland, the British paras managed to land, and although they managed to press on towards the outskirts of the suburbs of Arnhem itself, they found themselves fighting fierce German defenders. The US 101st, however, had probably the best of it on day one, as they were able to secure Eindhoven and other bridges on their way to Nijmegen, and this meant that 30 Corps could start trundling along. Now, day 2 opened up with us closing off table 1. This is because 30 Corps had basically managed to maneuver through this table, and so for day 2, most of the battling was done on the other subsequent tables. Now, overnight, we had gliders land on multiple tables. This was outside Arnhem, down on table 3 as well with the Poles, and into Nijmegen itself. Now, this meant that we had reinforcements quite crucially, especially for the Polish, who had been wiped out to a man in day 1. Now, day 2 started with fierce fighting in the surrounding areas of Nijmegen, particularly with the 82nd Americans taking heavy casualties. This is not helped by the fact that the Groesbeek Heights were occupied by heavy German artillery. However, as the day advanced, the Americans were able to establish a foothold into Nijmegen and went door to door, building to building, through lots of street fighting to finally manage to establish themselves at the entrance of the bridge. However, that is pretty much where 30 Corps found themselves. That's where they were stuck, and the reason for this was it was not going so well on the Polish table. This is not to say that the Poles weren't fighting well. They had some really good moments and managed to get some really good dice rolls and some good hits off on the Germans, but they were just in bad positions. They were in the open to start with, and they were immediately swarmed in their gliders by German defenders. This wasn't helped by the fact the Germans had tanks and they had artillery pieces and mortars that were honing in on their open positions. Although the team from Glider Team 1 managed to push their way into Driel and fight off hand-to-hand, storming different German defended buildings, they were also eventually forced to bunker down and wait for reinforcements. But those reinforcements never came. What was left of the Poles by the end of day 2 were pretty much isolated and surrounded, and just losing a different unit each turn, as they were unable to offer any resistance to the German heavy armour. This wasn't helped by the fact that the British in Arnhem were also pinned down and heavily surrounded. This meant that the Germans were able to siphon off some of their armour to cross Arnhem Bridge into the surrounding villages where the Poles were hiding, and this meant that they really did have their backs up against the wall. Still awaiting reinforcements, British 2 Para held out staunchly at the north end of Arnhem Bridge, but suffered from a lack of heavy weapons, the same as the Poles. They were being slowly but surely reduced in numbers and in the territory that they'd managed to capture, as it was slowly retaken by the Germans. British paratroopers that were in Oosterbeek managed to take some good positions, but they just could not push further into Arnhem. The defence of Arnhem was fierce. In particular, an MVP goes to a machine gun team on top of a church steeple that made a terrible toll on the Paras who were advancing in the open. In the end, there was nothing else for it really, other than to move street by street, trying to seek what refuge they could and try and make progress, but it was to no avail. At the end of day 2, Johnny Frost and the last 4 soldiers of Para 2 were forced to surrender. They'd been surrounded by a combined German force which included a quad AA gun, tanks, the arrival of a column of armoured cars across Arnhem Bridge, and many squads of soldiers. At this point, of course, the leading tanks of 30 Corps had secured, well, at least one side of Nijmegen, but they couldn't cross the bridge, and it came down to the final priority roll. The Americans had been slowly but surely firing across the bridge at the opposite end to a bunker which was occupied by elite German forces. They needed to flush these Germans out before they were able to move the tanks across. As the Poles hadn't been able to capture it from their side of the river, all they could do was fire their artillery across the river. On the final roll of the turn, the Allies needed to win priority, which would allow them to cross the bridge, having just killed the last defenders in the bunker, before a second German squad could occupy it. If the Germans won priority, they would occupy the bridge, and the Americans would have run out of time to cross over. So what happened? Well, the Americans rolled a 6, but the Germans rolled a 6 too, and the Americans, having won priority last turn, were on a -1. So the Germans reoccupied the bunker and controlled the objective. At the end of day 2, it proved to be 2 bridges too far. Well, this was a really good game. We had a great time celebrating the 40th birthday of our club, Kirriemuir Wargames Club in Scotland. I've got to give thanks to all the players who played. We had Dale, Jimmy, David, Mark, Steve, Bill, Campbell, Al, Jack, and Jed. And Jed Harbridge Rose put on a great game. He's the mastermind behind the game, provided much of the terrain, as did the Kirriemuir Wargames Club, and most of the figures as well were provided by not just the players, but also some people who weren't able to attend. It's really good fun playing a big game. We don't get to do it nearly enough. I hope you've enjoyed looking through these pictures, and hopefully it can inspire you to play your own large games as well. Until the next time, see you again soon.
remember. But I made it. It had to be a dice roll. I wasn't going to give up. Never did really get out of Oosterbeek and across the island here, even though there was an awful lot of kids who got killed out over the time. But that's as it was in real life. That was as it was in real life. Spindler got across the Rad in the end. That's real. Yeah. What isn't real is they did actually cross Nijmegen Bridge, and then there's a church somewhere around here, Elster, wherever it is on the thing, where they all got up at the end of the film and had a look across and said, I think it's a bridge too far, and they said, oh, I think it was the road, and blah 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 blah. That's where they were looking from with the binoculars over there. Yeah.
Not this time.
But not this time. For us it's been 2 bridges too far. But that was a good long fight all the way up through there. The American Airborne in particular did a good job on those. The poor old Poles. Absolutely minced.
That was my rolling.
Whose fault was that?
Me.
Well, no, not just you. Yesterday was just as bad, you know. The
Yeah, but I was rolling yesterday morning too.
Terrible time of it. So,
They all died.
yeah, that's it. That's the game done. Right.
Right,
Well,
Jed, could we just take a
Sorry,
minute to
Cheers.
thank you for
no bother.
organising the game?